Hi, my name is Dr. Jennifer Katona, and I'm excited to have this opportunity to talk to you about curriculum mapping, building quality theater curriculum. I'm going to take a moment to tell you how I think the best way to use this video is for your instruction. You see my face in the top right corner now. That's just so I could see you, have an introduction. In a moment, I'm going to move that face out of the way, and I'm going to take you through a 10 to 12 week process that I developed when I was the director of the graduate program in educational theater at the City College of New York, and which I now use as I work with different school districts on the East Coast. This process, as I mentioned, is a 10 to 12 week reflective process. It's really meant to layer on the different levels of curriculum mapping. I certainly would not expect anyone to be able to curriculum map years of instruction in one sit down. So you may want to listen to it through, and then something that you continue to come back to. Let's get started. The biggest question that I'm always asked is, where do I start? If you're a new teacher, or maybe you're just looking to refresh your curriculum, I always say the best place to start is at the end. And who better to know how to start at the end and work backwards than theater artists? We've got a jump start on this than our colleagues do, right? So building curriculum is no different than building a rehearsal schedule. What is the day of the show? What is the goal? And then we work backwards to that. How much time do we have? It's the same idea. We're constantly starting at the end, moving to the front, once again, starting at the end and moving to the front. As I mentioned, when I was at the graduate program in educational theater at City College, I taught the curriculum class for 12 years, and over that time developed what I call the four-dimensional approach, the 4D approach. And it's really thinking about each end point you have with your students and continuing to work backwards, as we discussed. So the first question you want to ask yourself is, what do you want your students to know and be able to do when they leave your building? So that might be 12th grade, 8th grade, 5th grade, possibly some combination thereof. Maybe a second grade. Whenever they walk out of the doors, what is the hallmark of a student who has gone through your program? Somebody looks at that student and says, ah, you must have studied with so-and-so, and I can tell. The second question is, what do you want them to know at the end of the year? So if you're a high school teacher and you've already thought about that portrait of a graduate, now you're really thinking about each year, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade. So you're going to start at the end of 12th grade and work backwards. Then you're going to start at the end of 11th grade and work backwards, the end of 10th grade and work backwards, the end of 9th grade and work backwards. One common misstep, I think, is that people start with 9th grade, first day of high school, and then try to see where they're going to go for by the end of 12th grade. But really, it's this constant going to the end and working backwards. The third question you're going to ask is, what do you want them to know at the end of given unit? So getting smaller now in our thinking. So if we take that 9th grade year, and maybe you do 6 to 8 units in a school year, what do you want them to know at the end of each unit? How are they going to demonstrate their understanding? Some people might also refer to that as the summative assessment, right? So again, in this constant working backwards, going to the front, you would take your 9th grade year, think about that last day of school in 9th grade. How does that culminate? Build up that unit, and then work backwards. Okay, so right before that unit, culmination, work up, culmination and working up. And we're going to talk a lot more about that through this video. And of course, the last step is, what do you want them to know at the end of the lesson for the day? So once you have your beautiful curriculum map, then you need to think about each given day. So often, classes end when the bell rings, and students are often flying out the door. Maybe you're yelling some last notes to them as they go. Maybe the whole lesson got sidetracked. But if you are very specific with your curriculum mapping, I'm fairly confident you can have a lesson that wraps up really nicely and you feel really positive that the lesson met the objective of the day. So in thinking about curriculum mapping, people start this process in a variety of different ways. Some people are standards-based. I am not. I think standards have a lot of great value in making sure that there's equity of instruction, but they're not my place of start. I find that it can confuse some people. Sometimes they're a little vague. Sometimes they're repetitive and they don't really get down to the content. I also find that if you go through this process that I articulate, you're going to back right into all the standards, and I'm pretty sure you're going to meet them. And then at the end, you can tweak and make some adjustments if you find that you're missing some content. I like to start with core values. What is important to you to teach your students? This is going to give you an authentic experience with your students. This is going to allow you to create curriculum that you're really passionate about. You don't want to have more than 1 or 2 core values, and they really need to drive your work. And this goes beyond just the content, the theater content. This is really about more of the intrinsic value of the arts. So for me, my core value is helping students have respectful discourse. How can I provide safe opportunities for my students to disagree with each other? How can I give them skills and tools to not interrupt and to build on someone else's idea, to hear an idea that they might be opposed to, but in a respectful way? That's my core value. So no matter what I'm teaching, I'm always going to make sure that there's time built in for that great discussion at the end. Now, as I said, using this video, this is really a tool for you. So if you want to take a few minutes now to write down your core value, or just jot down a few notes just so you can come back to that, I think it's a helpful tool. And then the big question we're going to ask continuously throughout this whole process is, what do you want them to know and be able to do? Know and be able to do. And it's all about specific, specific, specific. We know as theater teachers, there's 100 things we want them to know and be able to do. And we have to be able to articulate singularly in each lesson. Today, I want them to know this. Today, I want them to be able to show me the 3 rules of improv. So clear. Now, part of that might also be cheating out, projection, eye contact with their scene partner. There's some other stuff built in there, and that's always going to be taught, but you want to be entering each lesson into the very specific, what do you want them to know and be able to do? So step 2 in this process, right? Step 1 was writing down those core values, right? So if you're taking notes, right, you've got your step 1, write your core values, 1 or 2. Step 2, I want you to, what I call brain drain or brain dump, everything you want your students to know and be able to do with no real order or censorship. So if you're an elementary teacher and you're talking about 6 years, you know, sometimes people teach them in 3rd and 4th, you know, or kindergarten, 3rd and 4th, or kindergarten, 2nd and 5th, various combinations. So no matter what combination you're teaching, I want you to just on a piece of paper, write everything you want them to know and be able to do. And I want you to get really, really, really as specific as you can, because it's just going to help you out later. All right, so you're going to pause this video and do that. Great. Welcome back. Now that you have everything dumped onto a paper or a Google Doc or a chart paper somewhere, now it's time to start organizing those into units of study. I was a middle school teacher, so I always like to use middle school as an example. So we're going to visualize a 7th grade class. I also, for the sake of educating and creating a video, I like to use 6 units. It's a nice even number, usually 3 before the holiday break and 3 after. So this first step after you've kind of dumped everything down on a piece of paper is to start to organize them into units. And maybe you do that in a variety of ways, depending on if you've got Post-its on chart paper, if you're in a Google Doc, if you're just going to circle. But really, you're going to start bucketing your content into different like things. So maybe you wrote down improv, rules of improv, long form improv, short form improv. Then you have devising, right? So is that one large unit? Do you want to break that into several units? Do you want to say short form is for my 6th graders and long form is for my 7th graders and devising is for my 8th graders? So I want you to start looking at that big list you have, and I want you to start to organize it. What is going to be what are you going to cover in 6th grade? Maybe you're going to pull out a highlighter and highlight all the 6th grade stuff. What about 7th grade? What about 8th grade? So again, you're going to figure out how you're going to organize it. That's going to take some time, right? Remember I said this is a sometimes 10 to 12 week process. You're going to sit with that. You're going to look at that. It's going to haunt you. You're going to be thinking about it all the time. And then you're going to start to remember it's going to start to coalesce. So let's say that you've highlighted everything, and you're turning this video on again, and you've got your 7th grade, everything highlighted. Now you want to start to think about the units of study, and you're always going to work backwards, right? You're going to start over here at unit 6. So I really want my 7th graders in unit 6 to be able to put up a original devised piece of theater. Then in unit 5, that means I really need them to do some playwriting. In unit 4, I need them to understand devised theater. So in unit 3, I'm going to do an improv unit. In unit 2, I'm going to really explore character using physicality and vocal expression. And unit 1, like the center of a bingo card is a gimme, is always ensemble building. But you notice I started with unit 6. I thought about how do I want this to end, and then I went back, right? So if this was your template and you had your unit 6, you're going to start to put all the content in this section here where my little arrow is. And then how does it connect to your core value, right? So again, you're taking all of those highlighted notes you had for your 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, and this is now our 7th grade unit of study. And you're saying, okay, and again, with no real structure or order, but you know unit 6 is going to be a production of a devised piece. You're going to look on your sheet and you're going to just type in there again everything that goes in production. And unit 5 is going to be playwriting, so everything that goes into playwriting. Unit 4 was devising, so everything that goes into devising. Unit 3 was improv, so all your notes for improv. Unit 2 was physicality, character building with physicality and vocal tone. So everything that would go there. And unit 1 is ensemble building. And then again, your core value. So if you just had the one core value, maybe start to think about how that's going to show itself in each of your units. Or maybe you had 2, or maybe you even had 3, you couldn't narrow them down, and really start to articulate, okay, where and how are they showing themselves in this units of study. That's going to take you some time, right? Really, you would pause this video and you would go and work on that. And that's going to take you, again, another week or so. So give yourself the time for that. And here's an example. So I just went through everything. Here's another example, right? Play production, text analysis, maybe some theater history, devising, improv, and an ensemble unit. Once you have everything, then you want to write that essential question, that overarching umbrella question that doesn't have an answer, that really, remember, for my core value is about discussion, really having a good meaty discussion that hopefully engages students in debate, and will guide our work. So when you kind of get in the muck of things and think, oh man, we got off topic, you always go back to that essential question. So 2 examples of essential questions are, how does the strength of our ensemble impact our work on the stage? For unit 2, an example is, how does studying the rules of improv impact our scene work? I think the best essential questions are the ones that are overarching and stretch beyond just that unit of study. We know, just based on the small time we're spending together, I'm building a 7th grade unit where I want them to do a production at the end of the year. And so I'm using improv as a way to connect them as scene partners and connect them as actors for the end of that unit 6, right? So I want my essential question to be overarching and not just about improv, not just about why are the rules of improv helpful for improv, right? There's a larger goal. Essential questions are really hard to write also. So again, give yourself a little bit of time. And just to repeat again, you might have 6, 7, 8 units of study. But if you're new to this, I think 6 is a good place to start. And then as you get in the classroom and start to do this, you'll start to create your own pace. My little Zoom box is blocking it, but it says adding the learning targets. So this is really the meat of the work. So you had in these boxes previously, what do you want them to know and be able to do? And then that was just a bunch of brain dumping, right? And now we're going to start to really package it into each learning target or lesson goals, right? They can be called a variety of things. depending on what city you're teaching in or what school you're teaching in or just your own experience in learning this. So again, I like 6. I like nice even things as we're starting out. You'll know if you need more or less time as you start the process, but you have to start somewhere. So you're going to start to break down those learning targets. Here, and I just pulled one out just to kind of extrapolate that and talk about it a little more deeply. So here's my unit 1 of ensemble building. How does the strength of our ensemble impact our own work on stage? And to write this, again, as I said at the beginning, 4 dimensions, right? I started at the bottom with lesson 6, and then I worked my way up to lesson 1. So I had a big Post-it note with everything that's important to me with ensemble building. I want them to know each other's names. I want them to know what they have in common, because that's how we build real ensemble. I want them to know all the parts of the stage, right? This is middle school. Some of them have had experience, some of them haven't. So I want there to be some real even ground of vocabulary. I want them to know audience etiquette for in class particularly, but hopefully if we get to go see some live theater, that's really important. Audience is just as important as actor. I want them to build small theater companies. I want them to be in groups where they have an identity as a small theater company. I need to set some class expectations. I want them to know that this is their space, so I need to leave time for that. So I kind of had all that brainstormed on my piece of paper, right, back for a few steps ago. And now I'm going to start to coalesce it and organize it. So again, I'm going to start with my lesson 6, and my end goal for my unit of ensemble, and I'll just pause. I always use ensemble as my example because I think it's the hardest one. Oftentimes ensemble happens in like the first 2 days and then kind of peters off and people start on. I really think you got to devote time to ensemble building. I think you're playing the long game. You start school sometimes end of August, early September, and you've got these students for 8-9 months. You're going to still have problems in March and April around listening and cooperation if you don't set some strong foundational ensemble building in the beginning. Really set those class expectations and hold them accountable to them. So I like to really, and make sure that your ensemble building unit culminates in something. Make sure they have to show you that they can work as an ensemble, that they can work as a team. So, but that's often hard to do. How do you how do you demonstrate ensemble? So I like to do building class theater companies. And what that means to me is I might have a group of 5 or 6 middle schoolers together. They'll decide who's the director, the producer, who's the tech person, right? So they have jobs. We will have understood those jobs previously. They'll have a name. They'll decide what kind of theater company they are. Are they a devising company? Are they a touring Shakespeare company? Are they a musical theater? Are they avant-garde? What kind of work do they do? And then they'll give themselves a name, and maybe they'll create some sort of crest or logo for their company, and they'll spend some time doing that. So if I want them to do that, right, there's some key things they need to know. So they need to know and understand the jobs of the theater. So I'll spend some time before that reviewing that. As I said before, I really want them to know all the parts of the stage and audience etiquette and listening to each other. And again, creating commonality, knowing that everyone comes in at a different place. I'm going to really set my class expectations. I think it's important that we know what we have in common, what makes us unique, that helps us build relationships. Then my first day is just going to be that, as I'm sure many of you do, it's just eye contact and listening and really starting that collaboration. And I'm hoping you're noticing that I'm always talking from bottom up. I'm always starting with where do I want them to go and be able to do. That's how I know where to start. Great. So again, you're going to pause. You've turned this back on. It's a week later, and we're now at our next step, right? Which is thinking about our demonstration of understanding. This can also be, this is usually that last lesson, oftentimes called the summative assessment. I've switched my vocabulary to demonstration of understanding or demonstration of learning, just because really that's what we want, right? It's not some, assessment has a lot of connotation to it, and it's certainly what we're doing. We're giving them a summative assessment, but really the goal is that they can show us that they've learned what we've set out to teach them. So as I mentioned with ensemble building, my demonstration of understanding is students are in small groups, they create theater companies, name, style, jobs for each student. Another example would be for Unit 2 for improv, students maybe participate in improvisational showcase. Each student acts in 2 improv sketches. So I want to know, so I have a clear directive on where I need to get my students. And I'm going to go through my units and I'm going to decide how does each one culminate? How does a student know this is the last day of our devising unit and tomorrow we start theater history, right? Rather than we just ran out of time in the marking period and so we stopped and now we have to start something else. That feels very, again, unauthentic. And as theater teachers particularly, we need to culminate. We end in productions, we end in something, we end in a sharing and showing of our work. So in many ways, we are the luckiest of teachers when we think about structuring curriculum. This is something all teachers are asked to do, and it's easier for us than for many. So you've done that. That took a few days. You really grappled with that. I'm going to talk about this a little later, but I'll pause and say it here now. This is a cyclical process. So hopefully along this way, as you've been pausing and writing and reflecting, you've realized your essential question no longer fits. Or actually, you're realizing improv needs to come first, devising needs to come first, then improv, because however you come to that decision. Please be editing. You are not writing in pen, right? Your first attempt at this is not your final draft. It is a hope that as you go through this process, you're realizing you have to make adjustments and changes. And what better place to do that than on your document as you're creating it. All right, so once you have your summative assessment, your demonstration of understanding, then you need to think about your formative assessments. Now, again, assessment has a lot of connotations, but really assessment is just, do my students know what are they getting what I'm trying to put down? Are they learning what I'm setting out to teach them along the way? That's the sole goal of formative assessment. And again, theater teachers, you have a hand up on this. It's notes, right? How many times you watch a scene, you give notes, they do it again, maybe you give a more specific note, then they do the scene again, great, they got it. That's all it is, that's all we're doing, right? So once you've named your summative assessment, then you're going to write your formative assessments linking to that summative assessment. I have seen people make some mistakes where their formative assessments and kind of what they're assessing on along the way has nothing to do with that end product. So if, building class theater companies is something I'm going towards, then I want to make sure that my students, that I'm giving them opportunities along the way to practice that and show me that and for me to give notes on that. Formative assessments should not be graded. They are a place for feedback and really pushing the student along. They're really individual. Every student is going to need a different push in a different direction. So again, I kind of took a bird's eye view. Here's our unit 1 of ensemble building. And there's usually a formative assessment, obviously not on the first day, that can be a little tricky, but every day after that, right? So how do I know my students have learned or have been able to understand that they have things in common, and that helps us as an ensemble. So a formative assessment might be students share out 2 things they learned about their classmates. I might do an activity where they go around and kind of do a game show or a talk show, and they have to introduce a classmate. It's certainly not a quiz or a test, right? It's done in a fun way where students don't even know, but at least I can get a sense of like, okay, I get that they've started talking to each other. Maybe I have a fun worksheet for them. Maybe they've had to do a find someone who, but they can show me that they have gone around and they've seen what they have in common with their classmates and what makes them unique. Another example would be setting class expectations. If I set my class expectations, and again, that sometimes takes a few days. So I'm saying lesson 3, 4, 5, and that's just for some structure. You might need 3 days to do lesson 3, right? Which is setting class expectations. And I know my students are going to know and understand what I've been trying to teach them, because they're going to reflect on those expectations and how their class is meeting those and their areas of improvements. So an example of that is I've got my expectations up on the wall, and we just are sitting in a circle, and we're starting that process of really having conversation, because that's an important core value for me. And I'm going to say, great, everyone go around and share what's one thing as a class we're doing really well in our expectations. And what's one thing as a class where we still have room for growth? We're not calling each other out, right? We're talking as a class. And if we can do that, if we can start making connections to our behavior and our actions in class and what we've written on the wall, then I know that we're understanding the purpose of this activity. The last thing I'm going to say about these formative assessments is opportunities for feedback is there's usually done 3 different ways: peer-to-peer, teacher to student, and self-assessment. Pretty self-explanatory, right? So sometimes the kids are giving each other feedback, sometimes teachers giving the feedback to the student, and sometimes the student is assessing themselves. The key thing to that is that there has to be criteria. So you're never just going to have kids watch each other do scenes and give notes, right? You're going to have clear criteria around what they can give feedback on. I also like to vary it up. A nice pattern I have, just as a handy little side, is I like to do teacher-student, teacher-student, student-student, self, teacher-student. It's that kind of that gradual release. Also, I'm of the opinion that the last bit of feedback a student gets before their summative comes from the teacher. Really clear and direct. You're going to perform your monologue tomorrow. There are 2 things I need you to work on. I'm going to be really clear and direct in my expectations. It gives the student a firm understanding of what they have to come in with the next day. And then no assessment after that. I do think sometimes people make that mistake of assessing, giving feedback on the final. And I think that there's reflection on the final. There's feedback in the way of positive feedback only, versus here's still room for growth. Now, not to be mistaken, there's room for growth as we move on in the year, right? So I want you to continue to still working on projection. Your monologue, you did X, Y, and Z. Let's keep working on that projection. Great job. Versus that moment between when you were crying and then when you were angry. That's tricky, right? And this is a personal thing, and everybody has their own opinion on this, but giving someone feedback after they've already done it, I wonder to what end, right? So I like to give that summative feedback to the larger point, to the rest of the year. Great. So now you've gone and done all of that, and now it's weeks later, and we're reuniting again. And my Zoom is blocking off the top of my screen, but what I wanted to show you is, because it's tricky in a video setting, this is a sample of what a curriculum map might look like all filled out. These are the different components of it that we've been going over. So you have your units of study, and they're listed across the top with their titles. Then you have your pacing guide, right? So that might say September to October, October to November, right? So you start to understand how long things take. Your essential question, which we talked about, your learning targets, really breaking down those specific skills, getting really specific. Indicators of understanding are linked to formative assessments. How do you know along the way that students are knowing what you're trying to get them to understand? So if you really are focused on collaboration, you can see students working together. Demonstration of understanding as those summatives, and then our standards, right? So it's at the very end, once all this is filled out, that we go back to our standards, and I guarantee you, you will have met them. Right? And this is just to say again, and I said this earlier, it's a cycle. It's your essential question, your learning targets, your assessments. You're constantly going back and going, do I need to adjust one? Do I need to move something over here? You're constantly cutting and pasting, and you're looking at this over and over again. It's certainly not a start at the beginning, go to the end process. So just remember that you're always editing, you're always making changes. People often wonder, I get that as a common question. Can I go back and make a change? Can I go back and change my essential question? Sometimes you'll get to the end and realize what you wanted your demonstration and understanding to be, and realize that had nothing to do with your essential question. So one of those has to shift. You get to decide, but one of them has to shift. They should line up. So thank you for taking this video, taking time to watch this video. I hope that it has been helpful for you. Writing curriculum mapping is a long process. You just gotta get started, get it on paper. And what I just took you through, that's a 1 year process, right? That's your 9th grade process. If you're a high school teacher, you gotta, actually I should say that's your 12th grade, right? If you're a high school teacher, you would have started with 12th grade. You would have gone through that whole process. Now you gotta go back and do it for 11th grade, then 10th grade, then 9th grade. So this is really arduous and takes a lot of time and work. So, good luck on your journey. Remember, it's all about specificity, trying to be as clear as you possibly can, so that when your 42-minute lesson gets chopped off on either end because students came in late, or there was a fire drill, or you got to leave early for photo day, right? And these things happen. Your 42 lesson, you actually had about 15 minutes of quality teaching. That's okay, because you knew exactly what you wanted to teach them that day, and you were able to still meet your learning goals. So once again, I just wanted to say thank you for your time and best of luck.